A good Erev Shabbos. As our Parsha opens this week, it is getting dark. Yaakov is traveling, and now it's evening time. This is not the first time in the Torah it got dark, even in Bereshis. Light had not yet been created, so it must have been dark. Or maybe it was all just divine light. Too bad we weren't there to see it. By the time Adam and Chava were created, it was light. It was actually Friday afternoon, Yom HaShishi of the first week. They didn't have much time to get ready for Shabbos, but they did find time to ignore Hashem's one mitzvah of not eating from the tree. They were actually worried that the dark that came upon them soon after was punishment for their Aveira. The next morning it became light, then at the end of Shabbos dark, and then they started to figure it out, which is why we light candles at the beginning of Shabbos and a Havdalah candle at the conclusion of Shabbos. So now Yaakov is on his way. He leaves Be'er Shava and heads toward Haran. He encounters a place, or the place really, Vayifga ba makom. It says not just any place, but the place. We'll have to figure out what's special about this place. And he davens there. He prays. What does he pray? What does he pray for? We'll soon see. Those of us who learned Gemara Brachas over the past few years might remember there's a discussion in the Gemara chapter 4, page 26b, if you'd like to look it up. Why do we have 3 services per day? Why do we daven 3 times? 2 opinions, according to Rabbi Shua ben Levi. It's because prayer is parallel to the offerings of the daily temple sacrifice. The Torah says, one offering is done in the morning, one offering is done in the afternoon. There were 2 parts to the daily service. And then anything that was left over from the roster of the day's offerings was burnt on the altar at night. Shachris, the morning prayer, parallels the morning daily offering. Mincha parallels the afternoon daily offering. And Ma'ariv, the burning those leftover offerings at evening time. That's one opinion. The other, the view of Rabbi Yossi b'Reb Chanina, says that the 3 daily services were instituted by the patriarchs, the Avot, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. We've just seen the sources for all those in the last few weeks of Torah reading. Back in Parshas Vayera, we saw that Avram arose early in the morning to the place where he had stood, the Torah says. Where did he stand? Stood in the Amidah, obviously, of course, in prayer. 2 weeks ago, at the end of Parshas Chayesar, it says, Yitzchak went out, lasuach basadeh lifnot erev. Towards evening, he went out to speak. Means late in the afternoon. He went out to speak in the fields. Who was he speaking to? Hashem, speaking to God. This was the origin of Mincha. If you heard Rabbi Sachs's daughter speak briefly on the day of his Yortzeit, which was that week, she said that her father believed every prayer was a conversation and that every conversation was a form of prayer. Very nice. In this week's Sedra, it says, Vayivga b'makom at the beginning of the parsha. Literally, he happened upon the place. Rashi says makom is not just a very special geographic spot, Mount Moriah. It's also hamakom, the place. It's God. Like we say, hamakom yenachem eschem, may God, the place comfort you. We call God the place when we're comforting mourners. And the word vayifga here, Rashi notes, is the meaning of prayer, just like it says in Jeremiah chapter 7, same word for the same meaning. One perspective on Yaakov's prayer at the beginning of this parsha is that he felt threatened. Or Chaim HaKadosh looks at the word Harana. He was headed towards the city of Haran, is the simple meaning, and says that's rooted in the word Charon, anger. He says that after the encounter in last week's parsha, where Yaakov took the blessing of the firstborn, which Esav thought was his, obviously forgetting that he sold it, Esav sent his son Eliphaz after Yaakov to chase him down. This anger, Charon, maybe the Charana that the verse mentions. Maybe Yaakov comes to this place and davens there. Vayifga b'makom, he davened there for safe refuge. Kedushas Levi emphasizes this idea that he encountered not just a place, but the place where the Akedah happened, but the place, capital T, capital P. He encountered God and understood that he had to spend the night there. The sun was setting, getting dark, alludes to the fortunes of the Jewish people, eventually turning south a little bit. Instead of enjoying a radiant place and the shining blessings of God's bounty, we would become exiled eventually. We would become dispersed, homeless. Not only that, it means that the exile and dispersion would cause God, so to speak, to share in the pain of exile. He further explains that Yaakov took from the stones of Hamakom, that's what it says, he took some of that suffering upon himself, hoping to forestall this unfortunate vision or maybe dilute it a little bit. Apparently, the sun set early on Yaakov when he was at Mount Moriah. Some say he had prepared himself to daven mincha, but he saw that it was too dark, so he davened Ma'ariv instead. Many of the commentators suggest that God made nightfall unusually early, so Yaakov would wind up spending the night there. Anyone who's had trouble adjusting to that first week after the clocks change, after daylight savings time ends, will be able to relate. Why is it getting so dark in the middle of the afternoon? What's going on? They write that God wanted Yaakov to remain there because it was a holy place. It was where the Akedah had been, where the temple would be in the future. And in the meantime, Yaakov stayed the night, arranged the rock or the rocks under his head, daven Ma'ariv, and spoke with God. The Midrash Bereshis Rabbah explains this as a parable. A king had a close friend who visited his palace only on rare occasions. The king ordered his servants to extinguish the lanterns around the palace when his friend arrived. That way, the king and his friend would be able to converse privately without anyone seeing them. Midrash explains this is similar to God's causing the day to diminish so that he and Yaakov would be able to speak privately. Now, what was so important? What was so secretive that they had needed to converse in private? Surely nothing is hidden from Hashem. There's no hiding. That's what Adam found out way back in the beginning. And Yaakov, who was watching Yaakov? That this conversation with God required the cover of darkness, the cone of silence. Interesting. Let's look what happened, and maybe it'll make a little bit more sense. You know the dream that followed, a ladder with angels descending and ascending, happens to be my sister's bat mitzvah parsha, so we heard about it quite a lot in our house. God promises Yaakov that he will be with him, guard him wherever he goes, bring him back to this land and not forsake him. When Yaakov awakens, he calls the place Bethel, house of God, which also happens to be the synagogue I grew up in, fun fact. And he says, this is an awesome place. God is in this place and I did not know. Or others say, he said, God is in this place when I didn't know I stopped paying attention to myself and I noticed God. Then Yaakov takes a vow. Sounds a little bit like another prayer. If God will be with me and guard me on the way, give me bread to eat, clothes to wear, and return me in peace, whatever he gives me, I will surely tithe. Not exactly a prayer because we don't usually make our tithing conditional like that, but he meant well. I'm sure he meant well. What was happening is that Yaakov was at a point in his life of great uncertainty. He was on the run from his brother, who may have sent someone to chase after him with ill intent. He was unsure where he was headed. The place where he had been was unsafe to the point where he had to flee. And heading to Haran, a place of anger, didn't seem that much better. Yaakov quite literally was in the dark about so many things in life, not the least of which was that the sun started setting much earlier than he thought, causing him to pray, and at least according to some, to be the originator, the founder of our evening prayer, which includes an Amidah, a standing prayer, as well as in the form we have it in our Siddur, the evening recitation of Shema Yisrael, with the appropriate blessings that go with it. Let me suggest that Yaakov was teaching us and endowing us with a very important legacy, the ability to and the appreciation for davening in the dark. Ideally, we like to keep our world under control. We like to know in advance how things are going to happen, where everything's leading, how the story progresses, how fast, what direction. If the last year and a half has taught us anything, it's that is just not always possible. We are often operating in the dark. We're trying to make forward progress in the dark. So we wind up praying in the dark as well. We always hope for and we expect enlightenment. Yaakov Avinu, who would soon have his name changed to Yisrael, Israel. Stay tuned for next week's Parsha. Yaakov Avinu was teaching us how to and the value of davening in the dark. In his introduction to the Siddur in the evening service, Rav Kook writes, on the one hand, Ma'ariv is at a disadvantage, he says. The Mishnah in Berachot says, Tfilas Arvis Rishus. Ma'ariv is optional, parentheses, now it's obligatory, close parentheses. On the other hand, this quality of optionalness, writes Rav Kook, gives it an advantage over the other prayers of Shacharit and Mincha. Essentially, prayer must flow spontaneously from the heart. Obligation threatens spontaneity. Prayer that is free of all imposition is called pigia, happening. The verse in the Torah which recounts how Yaakov, our father, initiated the evening prayer reads, Vayifga b'makom. He happened upon the place. He prayed in the place. There's an additional reason that the word pigia, the key word, is appropriate for the evening prayer. Ma'ariv is conducive to sudden, unexpected incursions of Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, even prophecy. These fleeting moments of illumination were likened by Maimonides to lightning flashes in the guide for the perplexed. Even after his evening prayer, Yaakov, our father, merited the exalted prophetic vision of the ladder. That's the end of the passage from Rav Kook's Pirush, explanation on the Siddur. Perhaps we can take that inspiration from this incident. First of all, there's nothing wrong with davening in the dark. Arguably, at one level, that's what prayer should be. We are rudderless. We're lost, we're uncertain, we're in the dark in every way. And we reach out to Hashem, who's truly everywhere, in our hope to regain our equilibrium, get our balance back, our sense of direction. Nothing wrong with davening from a feeling of security and stability, but that's not all of life, as we now well know. Oftentimes we're not feeling so secure, not so rooted, not necessarily with both feet firmly planted on the ground. A little uncertainty, a little disequilibrium infuses our prayer with authenticity and genuine calling out, reaching beyond ourselves. What's more, it's punct from these moments of confusions and uncertainty and disorientation, calling out in the dark, as it were, that we're open to insights from beyond our normal frame of reference, outside of our comfort zone. Greater insight, greater receptivity, greater awareness comes from the lack of those things and the yearning for those things. From darkness comes light. From confusion comes insight. And as we know from our history, that which has happened to us and that which is yet to happen, from exile comes redemption. We're now 1 week into Kislev, the month which usually embraces the shortest days of the year, the earliest darkness. This year, the entire month of Kislev will involve the sun setting earlier each day. And yet, at the end of Kislev, in the most darkness, is the holiday of lights, Hanukkah, when we kindle lights each night at night, when it's dark, the part where it really gets dark, and each day we add to the lights and increase them each night that we light the menorah. Hanukkah is, of course, dedication, recalling the rededication of the temple in the times of the Maccabees, and empowering us to rededicate ourselves to kindling light and increasing light, especially in, the times that seem to be in darkness. So our current darkness and lack of stability in many things in life should be a springboard to a time when all this is past, and we can look back at how we've become stronger and more authentic people from having gone through it, and look forward to all of our prayers, those uttered during the day, those uttered at night, and all points in between, will all be answered for the good. Good Shabbos.